Och först ut idag är Ulla Kronborg Mazzoli från danska Geodatastyrelsen. Och du ska berätta om Danmarks erfarenheter. Välkommen.
Tack så mycket. Og hej. God eftermiddag. Og tak for indbyderne. Og tak til arrangøren for at tage op dette emne. Jeg har lovet at holde præsentationen i English, so I will do that, if that's okay with you. As you can see, I work in the Danish Geodata Agency, but I'm also part of the board of the Danish Geoforum, and I'm here as a Geoforum representative today. I like to start with this because even though I come with some experiences from Denmark, I do not know it all. That doesn't mean that you cannot ask, please comment when I'm finished with my presentation. I would like that. So what I thought about speaking is a little bit of how and why. I will do that fast. Some of you already know it. Then a bit about the geospatial object, the element. This is why we're here, right? Geodata. And then the gains we thought we should have and the gains we have had. And of course the pains, because as Sanna said, there are a lot of pains. Lessons learned, we have learned some. And then I will finish with a bit of my own perspectives about the future. So let's go ahead. You can say we started, as we all did in Scandinavia, this e-government for many years ago. And even longer ago, we started on building our SDIs. We have this tradition in Scandinavia of good collaboration, and it's the same in Denmark. What is interesting here is that the building of the NSDI has a lot of experience, and more experience than the building of the e-government. And you can say what we brought into or onto the road of open data from the SDI was a solid fundament. We have worked on this for 15 years. But also we went in when there was a political momentum, and that might be a piece of luck, but it also due to hard work. We have tried it before. We freed some of our data a long time before the open data program in Denmark. And then of course there was this bit about the legislation and the Inspire. I will come back to that. Legislation is a strong tool when you speak with the Ministry of Finance. So, 2007 more or less, the Ministry of Finance opened up their eyes for the NSDI and said, well, an SDI is the backbone. And we went, hooray, it only took us 10 years to get that far. And then from 2007 until 2013, we worked and worked and worked on a political level to speak with the Ministry of Finance, to speak with other sectors. What we could bring in was our map supply. I know you have something different, something like this in the other Scandinavian countries, but this has been running since 2002, so we had a lot of experience in distributing data on a solid SDI. So we brought that in, and we brought also these principles that derives from the Inspire directive. Good common sense. We had this, some call it the altar that we pray to, but it is a way of looking at data also deriving from the Inspire directive, that we have some data that we use broadly in the public sector, and we should reuse that because it's efficient and it brings down costs. So what it's all about, the NSDI, is having some data and getting them to the user. What is important is the standardization. And there again comes in the Inspire thing with their standards. And it's all about creating this interoperability. And when we spoke about this interoperability, we went straight on into the political momentum, because the EU have a huge program, ISA, Interoperability Solutions for Public Administrations in Europe. That's what it's called, the ISA. And they said this. And when our politicians heard that at EU top level they were speaking about an enabler to actually cut down costs and get more efficient public administrations. They really listened. And we could also tell them, we tried it with the addresses before, very good business case, saved a lot of money, and a bit too fast here. So we did try it before, and it has been a huge success with the addresses. This business case has actually turned out to be even bigger than the figures there. And then we told them, it's all written down in this law. There is a legislation about the SDI, the development of SDI. It is written in a law which standards you should use and so on and so forth. The Inspire Directive and the transposition of the directive into a law. Aha, they said. So there's a law telling people which standards to use. We like that. So we actually was a bit of an Inspire pusher here. So we told them NSDI is good. And they listened. So what happened in 2013, late 2013, was that within this strategy, common public strategy, they launched a focus area for the first time speaking about free and open data. When it was written down and when this program, the basic data program, was actually becoming a reality, we have these considerations about what are we going to do now? Are we just going to free some of our data? Are we going to free them all? But anyhow, the key elements in this basic data program is business cases, because we're speaking with the Ministry of Finance. It's, well, as I said, political momentum, and it is organized by data domains, meaning that you within your sector, where you have the greatest knowledge of your data, are going to do this standardization and going to open up data. Then it's all about simplification. It's all about getting your registries right. And there we have to speak about quality. And what is quality? Everybody was screaming for higher quality. But yeah, then again, I will come back to that. And then we actually managed to get this geospatial element in as an enabler. It is the key not only to location, but to a whole range of registers. I'm sure you know all about that. So what was actually contained in this basic data program? Here you can see the sectors. And as you see, map and geography is part of the common public open infrastructure in Denmark. And most of the data, maps and geography, is held by my agency, the Geodata agency. And here are the first basic data of geography and maps. And those of you who knows it also knows that this is more or less equal to the Annex 1 of the Inspire Directive. So we tried to pull the things together and say, well, if we're going to standardize according to a EU directive, we might as well use that standardization as a part of our basic data. Another very important part of the basic data program is this common data distributor. And it was, as the slide I showed you before, all about getting data from various agencies out and into use. The data distributor will be opened within a couple of months, meaning that every agency that has basic data has to distribute via the data distributor, meaning that you as a user have one single entry point to all the public basic data. We believe that a lot of private companies, research organizations will benefit from this. Of course, you have to model because you come from very different domains, different sectors. Everybody have their own data models according to the actual use. So we had to make some common modeling rules. That is part of the basic data program as well. A little bit about money, because it is also about money, as I said. Made an agreement, and here are approximately the figures. I will come back to them. What is important in this is that the overall business case is based partly on being more efficient in the public sector, but mainly gains in the private sector. So here you can see the business model, and you don't have to read all the numbers in small. What is important is what I just said. Efficiency is blue, that is the public sector. The red, that's gains, that's the private sector. And as you can see, the investments are done in the private sector, and then everybody is going to be happy from about 2016, more or less. I will come back to how it's actually going with this business case. The money. Well, 10%, as you can see, is from less administration. We don't have a figure yet whether or not we have met that. We think we have met it 2 times. Keeping data updated, yeah, well, that might be reduced from the user side. Efficiency gains 80%. Let's see about that. After 2020, when the whole business case is going to be realized, believes that we're going to gain in the public, but also mainly in the private sector. And the investments up front, the first couple of years, these figures was how it should be. I can tell you that the IT projects, more or less, they are 20%. The buying of free data was done up front, so 40% yes. But the data quality, that's really a difficult part. Because it's not that data was of low quality. Data was absolutely adequate for the purpose it was collected to serve. But now that you're going public and basic data, a lot of other sectors are going to use your data, and they might have other requirements. So it is going to be more costly to reach an average quality that most can use in their daily basis. So what happened was that a pool of data was being opened as part of the basic data program. But my agency and the local governments, the municipalities said, maybe we should go all in now with the maps and geography data. So we freed all our data except nautical charge. That's another history. And now we are financed through yearly budgets, meaning that each year we have to tell the Ministry of Finance that we are doing a good job. And they, of course, ask for proof. They want to see the geodata being used, especially in the private sector. So we really have some work to do now. But so far, we have succeeded. What we found out was that there really was no means of doing all these contracts. And what we saw when we actually freed all our data, not surprisingly, we had a huge race, a lot. Fortunately, our IT people were good enough to set up a few extra servers, so we didn't have a breakdown. So the cat was out of the bag now. Data was open, and we entered 2014. And what we saw, only a couple of weeks after that we opened up our geodata, was that they were shown on the Google Maps, on the Bing, and on the OpenStreetMap. And that was really good. We have historically fought these companies because they stole our data. Now they use them because they are of good quality, they are reliable, and we were happy to see them used there. Another happy guy is Mr. OpenStreetMap in Denmark. He has for years and years and years asked, please give me your data so we can make this wonderful map together. And we couldn't because, well, we had to charge for them. So on the day we freed our data, we actually, there are 2 hard disks full of all our geographical data. So we gave them to him, and he was a happy man. 3 days after, he had done a magnificent work and fed it all into OpenStreetMap. So OpenStreetMap in Denmark is very good based on public data. So just a short and brief research we did during 2014. We would like to know a bit about who is actually using, who are all these new users, what are they doing? Very quickly, the amount of users raised. You have to give your login enabled to access the data. We thought that might be a problem. It has shown it has been no problem at all. People register without problems. So we know who the users are, more or less. As you can see, mostly citizens are now logging in, looking at data, downloading data. And what is important here, I think, is that a lot of new users that would never ever have entered our boutique if it wasn't for the free data. So they had no experience of using, I will come back to that, no experience in using data. 59% found what they were searching for. That's not a good figure, is it? Meaning that a lot of people did not find what they were looking for. This is an important figure. Almost half would not have used or tried to use the data if they had to pay for it. So let me go through what our observations are, or the ones I've chosen. We can see an increased use of geodata broadly in and outside Denmark. We can also see that a lot of new sectors are on the move of using location data. Of course, the ICT sector is great and huge and has been for many years doing applications and things like that. But now we're looking at health, agriculture, and other sectors actually being interested in using the geographical element. It has increased the possibility of doing private-public partnerships because data are free now. So you see a lot of them coming up now, some of them funded by the EU, but a lot of partnerships are growing up now, and I think that's a very good thing, especially when you have the research part in as well. It is, without doubt, an efficiency driver in the public sector, and mostly because the money was taken up front, right? The Ministry of Finance said, fine, we are going to give you the money that it will cost to buy these data, and then we think you will gain so and so much, and they took that money away. So we have had to be efficient, so it has been an efficiency driver. What we have not seen is this growth in the private sector. And if you recall the business case, the major part of realizing the business case is should be coming from the private sector. So we have quite a challenge here. We have not seen all these products that we thought would be built upon these open data. Very little has actually happened here in the private sector. And I'm sure there are many reasons. Just to look again, private sector, the main key to realizing the business case. Geoinfo made a company survey to find out a bit about why the Danish geodata sector branch is not actually growing on these open data. And we found out that about 40% couldn't see any effect at all of the open data. Of course, 60% could, or that's what we believe. But that's a high figure. The thing about quality is still an issue, and we have to solve that somehow. It's not only about the quality that data are complete and it contains a lot of well-established elements. It's also about data definitions. And this is when you go cross-sector that this really becomes a problem. Terminology and so on. And then regulation is really difficult because most regulation is not ready for digitization, meaning that you can have a lot of good ideas, you can have a lot of free data, but legislation actually stops your progress because it is so complicated or because it asks for data that we do not have or data that are difficult to get and so on and so forth. So we need to look at legislation and how we can actually simplify the legislation in order to be more digital. And we found out that this thing about governance is a key issue also for the private sector. To know where the public sector starts and ends and where the private sector can take over. That's very important. This grey area between public and private is very difficult to manage in. So these were the findings, these were what the companies told us that were main issues of not using the open data. And then of course, let's talk about this. Let's sit down, let's break down the barriers between the public and the private. Let's talk about how to do this, how to realize the business case together. And when we asked the private companies to actually take a great look and answer again the why haven't you used the open data to grow, what we heard was, well, maybe we're not all that innovative in our branch, in our sector. Maybe the private companies are doing just a bit more of what they've always been doing. What they said is that, well, even though it seems much better than it did a couple of years ago, we still have this economic crisis. It's still difficult. We lack orders. Then there's this about the data-driven society, which this is much part of this, is you lack the skills. There are very few young people being actually educated in data management at a level where it can spur on the innovation of, for instance, big data and things like that, when you speak about geography and geodata. And then all these opportunities, this hope that there would be a lot of market outside Denmark, hasn't really shown. So what to do? We asked the private sector as well. What can we do about it? And this is what they come up with. Geoforum must play, the Danish Geoforum must play a huger part pushing the sector's wishes and demands into the new public digitization strategy. So we took this upon us as a task, and we have done that. Just recently made a 3-page note to the Ministry of Finance on behalf of the geodata sector. And what we, among the things we wrote were this. We need to have a more transparent framework. This is about public and private. Where does one start and where does the other one end? And we must have simpler rules for tenders because it is so difficult and the private companies are using so much time and money. So this is a major issue. Then we need to speak this about quality. What are we doing here? We do not have the answer yet, but something has to be done about the question popping up all the time about quality not being adequate, not being high enough. And I told you about the legislation and education and research. So this has been pushed into the new common public strategy from Geodata on behalf of the geodata sector. So what have we learned in my agency and in the agencies that have basic data? Well, nothing comes from nothing. And I don't know, what is lommeuld called in Swedish? The things you get in your pocket without doing anything? Well, that's the only thing that comes from nothing. For sure, it doesn't do it just to open up your data. There's this about access, especially when you're speaking about users that have no experience in using geodata. They need a whole new way of entering into this new world. And I like the IKEA way that you can actually choose your sofa and color and whether you will have it transported home. It's like that. It's a concept like that. We have to think about all the users that are not used to VMS, VFS and all the things. And then there's this about, really it's about quality, right? Because who is going to pay for the higher quality and the extra sizes and the formats? We have to solve that. And the governance. The SDI is of chosen nature, and you do know that. Multiple stakeholders, and especially now when we're going across sectors. You have ownerships and... How am I doing with time? Otherwise, you just throw something at me. I will stop speaking. It's all this cross-border, cross-sector, cross ownerships that's really difficult. And then there's the sow harvest. If you invest in higher quality, you are not the one who are actually going to gain from it. The users on the third hand are going to gain. So the financing again, the one who is investing in it are not harvesting the gains. Said that. Flexibility versus standardization, the overall always discussion about open source and not open source, that's a problem as well. challenge as well. And you really need to address all these challenges on all levels, from legislation down to the very technical level. On all levels, you need to have agreements and binding rules, otherwise it won't do. So to finish off my perspectives, I think we have a lot to do in this contradiction that it could be that on one hand we're going to have an efficient public sector, and on the other hand we're going to spur growth in the private sector. Because how far shall the public sector go in helping the users and then maybe stealing some of the private sector market? I'm not sure there's one answer to that, but it's something that we need to discuss with the private sector. And then again, I've said some of it before. Do the public sector make a lot of formats in order to content the customers, or do we make a few? Do we end up with a GML and say, well, it's up to the private sector to customize it? And is that access or accessibility? Do we do applications? We might have to in order to help our fellow agencies. We might have to have some applications in order for them to use our data in their administration. Should we just leave it up to the private sector? So far they have been a bit dull. And do we risk losing this authoritative stamp? Reliable data when we free them and everybody can use them in whatever way they want to. Is that a risk that it loses some of this authoritative stamp when it's put together with other data, for instance, OpenStreetMap? And is that a problem? And then again, standards, common components. How much common are we going to do in the public sector in order not to rob the private sector from their part of the cake? And again, reuse and share, that's good for the public sector, but it might not be good for the private sector. Open source, we would like to do a lot on open source, but open source is sometimes very costly because you have to customize it all the time and you have to have in-house knowledge about it and things like that. So the world around us, Denmark is not entirely an island. So we have a lot of things that we have to. It's the same in all countries. We do not live alone. The financial crisis, it's still there. We can see it lingers, so the private sector tells us. They're not unlimited resources. We have to think about that as well, being a public sector. And this about being efficient, it's the taxpayers' money. Digitization is hot, it's true, and it is true that there is a growing recognition about the geospatial element. And that's good for us, that's good for our business. And then again, you're not local anymore. No matter what you do, you're global and somehow, especially if you're part of the EU. And then you must be agile, that's one thing we learned. This about having these plans for 5 or 10 years, well, the world is just changing too fast. Being very, very agile means that you might have to slack a bit on standardization. Standardization takes time, but it also makes it robust. So where can we meet in the middle of that? And then we have the data-driven economy. I can see in Europe that this is getting huge. And I can see that the Commission, the European Commission, is really putting aside a lot of money on this data-driven public administration, economy, what have you. So the digital single market, that's something to look after. And this is where I think our sector really have something to come with, the private and the public sector, in supporting the digital single market with this geographical element. So, however you look at it, I don't think there's any way around it. You have to go open with your data, even though it is costly and there are challenges. It is the only way to get our data out working and serving society and the end user. So this was it, and that was that. Thank you.
Tack så jättemycket, Ulla. Väldigt intressant. Jag är säker på att det finns flera frågor ute i publiken. Och du har sagt att det är okej att vi frågar på svenska.
Yes.
Du förstår svenska. Någon som har en fråga? Så kommer jag med mikrofonen. Ingen vågar. Inga frågor. Jag har en fråga.
Ja,
du sa någonstans i början att det hade lett till en effektivisering för kommunerna i det här. På vilket sätt då? Vad var det som hände där?
Effektivisering, it's mostly about standardization in the first thing, but it's also about the reuse of data. The thinking that we have these common data, that we only have one register for addresses. You don't have each in each municipality. That's a huge gain. And it goes for other data as well, but addresses is a good example.
Intressant. Någon som har kommit på någonting mer? Då tackar vi så jättemycket. Och jag ska säga då det i samband... Jo, men här har vi någon. Ska se. Jag kommer utan att ramla.
Okej, då tar jag det på svenska.
Ja, visst.
Sasha heter jag, jobbar på Halmstads kommun som tekniskt ansvarig på byggnadskontoret. På Halmstads kommun så har vi en case, alltså ett fall, där vi då brottas med problematik att få i princip godkänt från systemleverantör att komma åt våra egna data. Det här är vi inte ensamma om. Det här vet vi. Är ju samma sak som de flesta andra kommuner nu som använder sig av samma leverantör har eller kommer ha problem med. Grejen är ju när systemleverantör har levererat systemlösning som inkluderar en databas och så äger vi våra egna data som är lagrade i databasmodellen i databasen, så försöker leverantörerna sätta stopp eller ta extra betalt för att vi själva ska kunna komma åt våra egna data. Det är liksom principen som vi försöker bestrida just nu. Undrar bara ifall ni som ändå hållit på med detta ett tag har erfarenhet av detta i Danmark, eller om det då finns något sån där europeisk direktiv där man då inte tillåter detta, så att vi kan använda det vid den här argumentation som vi håller på med, den här leverantören. Tack.
Ja, visst. Tack för den frågan. We have experiences with this as well, and we have had the same problems, especially in the municipalities in Denmark before. What has happened is that instead of letting a private company manage the data, the municipalities and the state got together and made a cooperative where they pool the data and pool the money, and of course they have free access. So they pay for building the management of the data now. With the basic data program, we eliminate that problem as well, since the data distributor is common public and financed by the Ministry of Finance. But there still are agencies that have the same challenge, especially agencies that are semi-research partners, which have some universities to handle their data, and they can have the same problem as well. So we try to eliminate it because it's not feasible to have to pay to get access to your own data. And we are almost there, but not entirely. And then you asked about the EU directive or something like that. Well, I'm not sure whether there are any written down in a directive that it's actually prohibited to do that. But there is the PSI directive. And the PSI, in short, says that all public data must be available for the lowest of cost or for free to all society. So it might be worth looking into the PSI, Public Sector Information Directive it's called. Did that answer your question? Thank you.
Tack så mycket, Ulla. Jag ska också passa på att nämna att vi har inga gåvor här, utan gåvan går till Läkare utan gränser. Fantastiskt. Tack så mycket. En till applåd.